Hello, my name is Jim Carr, and I'll be your host for this episode of Bring the World Home, a production of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii. Today, we have with us Ann O'Connor, who served in Western Samoa. And it's kind of funny because I served in Western Samoa some 30 years before you did, just about 2 villages down. Can you explain to us what you were doing there?
Jim, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Samoa in Falefa, and my job was originally a village-based development volunteer. I did that for about a year. I lived with a family, and then my second year I moved to the capital of Apia where I was a youth development officer.
And what years were these?
2002 to 2004.
Okay, I was there in 1973 and 74, so like ancient times. So it's kind of interesting to see what happened to this little stretch. I was in the village of Fusi, which is not very far. It's about 20 stone throws from Falefa.
Yeah.
When you were there, what was Apia like? What was the village like?
Well, I've seen your pictures, Jim. And honestly, you can hardly tell the difference between, especially the village pictures, between when you were there and when I was there. The pictures of your school looked strangely the same. Mm-hmm. The pictures of the Samoans, of people that we lived with, remarkably the same. Ie Lava Lava is probably still fashion choice. Apia has changed a bit. I'm sure they put in a stoplight.
Oh, nice.
In the early 90s.
I was just thinking that you were probably working with some of my students before, or maybe even the children of my students before.
Could have been.
Yes.
Possibly.
Now, when I was there was no electricity into the villages. That finally arrived?
I would say on the whole that almost everybody had electricity in their homes, especially in their main houses. You know, there's always one main house, and then might be other fales around the property. The houses that might not have had electricity were most of the houses back in the plantation.
Oh, okay. And when I was there, there were only a few of what we would call fale palangis, or more of the cement houses. And most of the people were still living in the traditional thatched fale, Samoa. Mm-hmm. How about you? Did you see a difference there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was saying. Most of the houses, most of the electricity would be in the fale palangi. Most families had, well, I'd say 50-50. The people who had a fale palangi, the 50% had that, and then they also had fale Samoa on the property also.
Okay. I think the biggest difference between maybe the time you were there and the time that I was there was that when I was there, almost all Peace Corps volunteers, or a vast majority of them, were in education.
Okay.
That wasn't the case when you were there.
No. While I was there, around 2003, the last group of teachers graduated. They graduated the program from Samoa, meaning that they felt that they had achieved all their goals and no longer wanted the teacher program or teacher trainer program in Samoa. So when I was there, we had a group of community development volunteers, which I was a part of. We also had people involved in marine education, so that would be teachers also, but they were involved in conservation in the village, at the village level. We also had a lot of IT volunteers, and so that was where the shift mainly came in between teachers and replacing them with IT, so people who knew computers, lived mainly in town, getting the government offices up to speed in the technology area, but also people who were teaching computer skills in the village. So still a little teacher presence, but not the same as when you were there.
When do you think that more volunteers were now in Apia, or the capital, than in the villages than previously?
Well, I don't know how many people lived in the village and how many people lived in town when you were there.
I guess when I was there, I always assumed that a lot more of us were in the village, but I have no statistics on that.
You had 30 volunteers over, at one time, all living in villages. And then the rest it was probably, 60-40, 40% in town, 60% in villages.
Oh, okay. Now, describe your job in the village, because this is interesting. I mean, you saw a completely different part of Samoa than I did. I taught in that school halfway between our 2 villages, but you were dealing more every day in the village.
Yeah. My job was to set up, to organize and work with the Matai, the village chiefs, or I could work with the women. I was basically what they said was that we were there for the entire village to help do strategic planning and prioritizing and to just decide what was needed in the village and work with them. It wasn't defined very well. Well, there isn't much of a definition for what we should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was different for every single volunteer. We all had something different going on.
For you, how do you describe what your day was like when you write home letters to friends? What did you do on a day-to-day basis in this job? I'm having a hard time.
I think we all had a hard time with that. It was a lot of meeting, a lot of sitting down and having tea with people and trying to find out where they were coming from and what was needed, because often what you were hearing from the Matai was one type of need. When you spoke to other families, their need was different than what was maybe brought up in the village council. So kind of reconciling that maybe if it was just mentally, just meeting, talking to people, different groups, and building trust and learning the culture, I guess, was the main thing for the first year of what we did. Some people got into their villages and their committees already knew right away what they wanted done. Mm-hmm. So they already had a head start and could get focused on something very concrete. The people that I had the most respect for were the volunteers who went in and really had to start over and to learn to meet people, put themselves out there, talk to a lot of people, and then often they would run into some type of hurdle and they had to figure out how to get around it. And coming back thinking again, okay, this didn't work. How am I gonna get to everyone in my village? Right. And consistently just went out and kept trying.
Because that seems like it would be an awful hard thing to do, because for your first couple of months there, you have to do a lot of learning the culture to even be able to talk to people. To be able to understand what they're saying to you, even if you understand the words. And then to be able to help a village that's maybe been there for 500 years or 1,000 years. What type of projects would you work on?
As I said, everything varied so much. Some people just really worked on gardens. Mm-hmm. And Samoa's been there a long time. They know what they're doing.
Right.
It's if somebody needs something, that I'm there to help, but as we all kind of found out, things run well on the whole. Mm-hmm. Some people decided that they wanted to build gardens. So they built big gardens and, gave information about nutrition and did programs in that way. The last program in my village that I worked on was helping a village. They wanted to do some income generation, and they wanted to do it by, of all things, making kind of a pig farm. Mm-hmm. And so it was when Pitanu'u, which is a sub-village within my larger village, all the families wanted to get together, and through a program at FAO, the agricultural wing of the UN, and the agricultural department of Samoa, bring in pigs from New Zealand and take Samoan pigs and learn how to crossbreed them, so you get a better meat, so they'd be worth more, but yet they would still eat the local food rather than expensive food. Yeah, right. So I helped them with their communication with FAO and the government agency, and how, working with them and how to plan for this financially and whatnot. But that was my biggest project that I did in my village.
In looking back, I'm thinking that your job was a lot harder than mine, because all I had to do is show up at 8 o'clock in the morning to teach, and teach till 4, and my job was very defined. It was very easy to do. You're a teacher, you go in. Now, like I said before, you start off 50% of your job is already done just by showing up.
Right.
Then it gets like, if you're a really great volunteer, you taught well. But it was so defined, it was easy. A lot of people tried to do side jobs on top of that, like teaching other teachers in the district, mm-hmm. helping them with their science or whatever they were teaching. But your job sounded so much more nebulous, it would be really hard to get a handle on.
I think it was really difficult for volunteers, especially in the first few months are the most difficult, when you don't know the language well enough, especially to express yourself, mm-hmm. nor to really get a job done.
Right.
That was the hardest time, I think, for most volunteers. And the fact that everyone starts at different levels also. Some villages are very organized just on a day-to-day basis anyways, regardless if there's a Peace Corps volunteer there. and then to throw a Peace Corps volunteer in the mix, and you know, you're right, it was very difficult, and it was, I think people were very hard on themselves too, whether they were getting enough done, if they were, you know, if they felt they needed an escape to go into a PIA, if that was okay.
Yeah.
Everyone is always second guessing yourself. You're probably your hardest critic.
Oh yes, and with Peace Corps, there's always this euphoric high, and then you drop down in a real slump for a while, and you get back up to more a plateau that's more reasonable. Yeah, I mean, every volunteer did it. It just seems like it would be hard when you're trying to, you know, I've given up 2 years of my life to come work in this place, and if you could measure, like the first volunteers in Samoa built water-sealed toilets.
Right.
And you could look down the coast and say, okay, I've got 20 water-sealed toilets built. I mean, it was a measurable thing that you could, I had been to 320 classes or something. I could measure something, but your work sounds much harder.
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard to know if you were doing the right thing, if you know, if you were getting stuff accomplished, or if there was just nothing to get accomplished, so you weren't really needed, and to move on to something different. You know, where do you give up? Do you continue to stay? But I think what was the most important was that after a while, everybody saw progress in different ways. You find the longer you're there, the more people know you. People will come to you, whether it's in your village or just other programs that pop up, and you can volunteer with another group or at the church, or something comes your way. You just become, all of a sudden one day, you're part of a community. And so whether it's something that maybe Peace Corps told you to do, or whether it's something that the village is doing, whether it's a fundraiser for your village, you are a part of something.
Yeah.
So.
Because there's one part that we talked about earlier, and I wanted to bring up. In my 2 years in Samoa, I trained with, in my training group, there's probably 50% guys, 50% girls.
Right.
I went out to my village. I would come in once in a while into town, and I'd stay with another Peace Corps volunteer. I don't think I really saw or associated much with Peace Corps girls when I was there. When I was talking to you, it almost dawned on me then that what would be the difference in lifestyle for a male volunteer in Samoa versus a female volunteer in Samoa?
Yeah, I think that was something I think the females talked about a lot.
How come us guys never talked about it?
And I don't think any of the men wanted to admit that there was differences and maybe some greater challenges that we had, but I think there were. And my group was all female. And as I mentioned, the group before me in development was mostly female. There was only 2 males in the villages. And after we had been there for a while, I think Peace Corps started to see that as a male in the village, you had so much more freedom, and your language grew exponentially. Not to say that the women couldn't speak Samoan, but your vocabulary as a male, from hanging out with other males, the things you talk about just differ so much more than how women are confined and what you're expected to do in your village. Not to mention, you know, you don't want to shame your family. You don't want to do anything that's going to give yourself a bad reputation, especially when you're working in such a precarious role with the Matai. So you really wanted to watch yourself and not, you know, not talk to men too long, or if you did, just you had to accept the consequences of what might happen if people were angry with you about that. And
this is really strange and hard, because when I lived in a village and lived with a Samoan family, I mean, you went up to the plantation with the guys and helped pull weeds, cut the grass and stuff like that. You went down with the guys in the village and you drank kava with them, and we might have gotten silly and rambunctious. And you did it so that the Matais wouldn't know that the Talalay or untitled men were drinking kava, and we'd sneak off and do stuff like that. And if you got caught, it wasn't such a bad deal because you were a guy. It was okay.
Well, if I got caught doing that with a whole bunch of guys with a Talalay out, could you imagine?
Yeah, I know. All of a sudden, it would be much harder for a girl. I never even thought about the differences.
Yeah.
Because Samoan culture is really they're inclusive, but they're inclusive in everything, and they do have strict rules for girls and guys.
Oh, I would run. I would run in the village in the evenings, and well, they still have saw. So, you know.
And for you guys that don't know what saw is, that's the evening prayers for the family, and usually they get an old air cylinder or something, they bang it and nobody can move in the village. The families have evening prayers and then they bang it again when it's okay to move again.
Right, and it's about a half an hour, and it's
Yeah.
right at about sunset, so 6:30 or 7 o'clock at night. So the trick was to get your run in when the sun started to set, but yet it was getting cool, but yet you'd have to make it back because you could not be on the road during SAW, otherwise you would be fined. And so I would run in my village all the time, and I couldn't run in my shorts, so I had to run in a Ie Lava Lava, and people just thought it was the weirdest thing.
I know. I mean, it would have been a weird thing for a guy to do, but they might have said, oh, he's practicing for soccer, so it might be okay. But for a girl to do it.
Everyone would ask you, are you training?
Yeah.
Are you training? Well, no,
Yeah.
I just do this every day.
No, but you told me about an incident with the son in the family.
Highest Matai in my village lived next door, and his son was the only person I knew that was my age when I first moved to the village. And so I knew that I didn't want to have a boyfriend and I didn't want anyone to talk about me. But, he was the only one I know. So I would talk to him if I saw him on the road, and the rumors just started going on and on and on, to the point where I just really couldn't talk to him anymore, because it was, why is she here? Is she here for a husband? And, within your first month, 2 months, that's pretty damaging. You just don't want that to happen. So in my eyes, I was doing the right thing by not being involved in the Western sense.
Uh-huh.
But even just being associated with one male was, caused my family grief.
Yeah. I mean, this would have been such a hard thing because I found Samoa such an easygoing place that you could talk to anybody. You could be, it was so much less restrictive than America for
Right.
me.
Yeah.
And yet on the other hand, when you're like 2 miles away, 30 years later, it's much more restrictive for you.
Right.
It must have been harder than getting parts of your job done or your personal life.
I think our job really for the first year was just to figure out those dynamics. And that was what made you successful in some ways. And it is what made you good at, and what you take back too, is learning how to read people and looking at those nuances and seeing what is behind everything rather than just what's in the front.
Well, I forgot to ask you, what type of living situation were you in, the house that you stayed in?
I lived with a family in a Fale Palangi.
Okay.
So I had a room.
All right, so you had some personal privacy? Did you ever feel the need to get in there and just, close off the rest of the world?
Yes. Yes, I did.
Yes, I used to have to go to my classroom late at night, and I would pretend that I was grading papers or something, because it was my only sanctuary where the whole village wouldn't come with me. And I could sit up there at night, and I had a little, my parents would send me those little cans of pudding or something, and I'd hide them up there, and I'd open them, and I'd eat them with my ruler, because we didn't have any spoons, That was my only sanctuary, getting away once in a while. Samoa's a beautiful place, but a lot of it sometimes is just a little too much. You need a break
Yeah.
once in a while.
Oh, most definitely. I
Yeah.
think that's how everyone felt. But yet, even when you're on a break, if you go into a PIA, someone sees you and then you come back and someone says, oh, I heard you were on the corner of this street and that street talking to that person. You're, what?
Yeah, right.
How did you hear that?
Yeah. Oh, so that was your first year.
Yep.
And then your second year, you moved into the wild and wicked city there, right?
Yep.
Into
Yep.
the nightlife.
Into the nightlife?
Yes, right. Apia closes down by 6 o'clock at night or something.
Oh, it stays open until about midnight now.
Oh, okay. So,
Yeah. Not on the weekend, not on Sundays. You know that.
Yes.
My second year, I was a youth development officer in the Ministry of Women, Community, and Social Development, their youth office. And so I lived by myself in government housing by the National Hospital in Mototua.
Okay.
So that was also interesting. I felt, in many ways, it was a real sad day when I moved out of my village and moved into town. But on the other hand, it was a good opportunity to see Samoa in a real, I got to see everything. Well, not everything, but I saw the village view and what it was like living in a village. And then I also saw what it was like if you worked in a PIA. And so it was nice. It was good.
So what was your job there working with youth? What was the day like?
I would go to the office. So it was a little bit, there was accountability in that sense where, Monday through Friday, by 8:30, I had to be at my desk. And the youth office has various youth programs that they put on during the year. So our job really was doing planning of it, setting it all up, and then actually doing the programs. So while I was there, that was the main thing we worked on, was a youth camp, a youth forum, and that reached 100 rural youth. So that was a real undertaking. We did a career day. That was, the National Youth Week. We did that. And then on top of that, they were trying to think of new youth programs. So we were in the development stages of a rural youth program that different villages through their churches reach youth, give them some self-esteem, different programs.
And which of the 2 years do you think was more fulfilling?
Well, everything comes together your second year in general.
So it's a disadvantage to the first year, because the second year you know the culture, the language better, and everything else. But still, and of course, living in the village is a big thing.
Right.
So that's a.
I mean, I wish I would have had the second year of the village so I could see the progress on that. But then again, I wish I had the second year of working in APIA, because things I had started, I would have been able to see more progress. Every time you do something the first time, it's just trial.
Yes.
And then you see what you could build upon. And so then I would have known what I could have done differently and seen different results in my second year. So.
And did you keep up your running in APIA?
I did.
Oh, okay.
I ran on the seawall.
Oh, okay. Because that was, in some cases, that might have even though you would have been strange in the village doing it, it might have been easier than being in an APIA and doing it. Because APIA has kind of I don't want to say less of a Samoan culture, but it's got a culture of its own, which is mostly Samoan, but some other things in it.
In the village, people knew who I was attached to.
Yes.
So they knew that I was Ane and where I lived and how to approach me. In APIA, people didn't know if I was a Peace Corps volunteer, if I was a tourist, if I was a UN volunteer. No one knew, and I had no attachment. I lived in a house by myself. So the way people treat you is different. I didn't like walking as much by myself, although I did it all the time. But every time a male would pass you, you'd get some comment thrown at you.
Yeah.
So I would always walk with my shoulders up. So yeah, running was a little bit stressful at times, but I had someone that I could run with, and so it made it a little bit more enjoyable. Yeah,
I knew when the brother in my family, when he and I went into APIA on time to time, he would change totally as soon as we got into APIA.
Cut loose.
He was the boy from the village that's out in APIA, and it was different. And I figured that it was the same when you were there.
Same thing.
Now tell me, I asked you this before, and you stumbled on it and you couldn't think of it. Why did you join the Peace Corps?
I still can't remember why. I know that I always had an interest in living in another country. And I know that what I wanted was a really difficult job. I wanted something that was going to test me and try me, and I got it.
Yeah, we were talking about this before, and you were saying there was a difficult job and there's a difficult living situation, and that a lot of Peace Corps volunteers kind of want to have the difficult living situation. Send me up on the top of the mountain with nothing, and I have to.
Well, yeah, you always bring up how our jobs would be that they were so different, and that you don't know if you could do it when what the job I did. And as Peace Corps volunteers in 2002, we were always like, how did they do it? In Peace Corps Group 1, they're in the village all the time. Their language skills must have been phenomenal. And how difficult your living experience would be. But yet, we had a difficult experience too, I guess. It was just in a different capacity.
Yeah, I think there was still, our living situation was not much different, other than you had walls on your house and I didn't, because I had the traditional Samoan folly back 30 years earlier. But the still dealing every day in a different culture and in a different language can bring up things that you don't, sitting here would be hard to even imagine.
Right.
Those are both its own reward and its own drawback.
Well, I think also, we have this beautiful surrounding of Samoa. It's the idyllic Pacific paradise that you just stare around you and you just feel like, I can't believe I'm here. So then you think of the Peace Corps volunteer in the middle of the desert, or, in a blizzard somewhere,
Yes.
and you kind of feel guilty about it at times because you automatically assume that you have it easier because it looks more beautiful, and
Right.
there's certain hardships that just aren't there. You know, we had a movie theater where you could escape to, you know, and people did. If they were having a tough month, they would come in, maybe even a tough week, I don't know.
Yeah. It is different for the volunteers in Samoa.
Right.
The trials and tribulations are different from that guy in the Sahara or something like that. I wonder, we've had volunteers on the show that have come back from there and they've had only good things to say about it. And you're
Right.
kind of wondering, it's 110 degrees out there every day. How could he have anything good to say? I wonder if all Peace Corps experiences come off as well. Would you do it again?
Yes, I think I would.
Do you think you would?
Would you?
I'd like to very much.
Yeah.
Where would you want to go and how would you want to live?
I don't know, because it's easy to say something and you know that it will never meet the expectation that you have set up in your head, but you'll walk away with a good situation regardless. But it's not ever what you think it's going to be. So I have a hard time putting my finger on that.
Yeah, I guess I'm the same way. It'd be better if somebody else picked a place for you to go because when you got there, you'd either like it or not.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, this ends this episode of Bring the World Home. I'd like to thank you for watching and join us again when we go to another country or another Peace Corps volunteer solid. Thank you.